Okay, do you want to start off?
Oh, hello. Yeah, hello everyone. So I'm Julien. I'm I'm the creator or core contributor of Open CTO of Datakin. And in the past, I worked at Yahoo, building platforms on top of Hadoop, at Twitter, where I started the Apache Parquet project in collaboration with Cloudera, and then at Dremio, working on Apache Arrow, and more recently at WeWork, and where we started the Marcus project, which is very related, and now at Datakin.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's Kevin. So I am working at Northwestern Mutual, leading a team of data platform engineers to build a enterprise data platform for the company. And so we've been working quite a bit with Julien and the community within OpenLineage and Marquez, and we'll be getting into a lot more of those details here today. So I'm going to stop our sharing. So maybe to start off, some people might be wondering, what is OpenLineage? So Julien, do you want to maybe give a quick background?
So yeah, OpenLineage is a project we started last year with the goal to collect data lineage and all the related metadata, and to define that as a standard across the entire data ecosystem. So I think it's interesting because we started this project by reaching out to a lot of people in the ecosystem, either contributor to open source projects or more proprietary data platforms. And everybody agreed like we need a standard representation for lineage. And that helps with a lot of use cases, whether it's data governance or data operations or compliance and all of things like that. And so there's been a lot of interest from the beginning to define that together, and so that we can enable all those use cases and really standardize across SQL, Spark, Python, all of those things, and schedulers, how we collect lineage and make it available for all those use cases. Yeah, so it's kind of what OpenLineage is. And so it came out of Marquez. So Marquez was this metadata project we started at WeWork about collecting information from about all datasets and all jobs. And Marquez, which is a project that Kevin, you've been using at Northwestern. So I was kind of curious of how you got to pick that.
Yes. Yeah. And so as I get into this, I just want to kind of let everyone know who's watching, please ask questions, because part of this, I want to share, what we've learned at the enterprise, trying to build this type of functionality, getting involved in open source projects. But I also really want to know what you want to know more about. So please let us know. But yeah, at Northwestern Mutual, I joined there a little bit less than a year ago, and our task was probably similar to a lot of people out there. We want you to enable a lot of these data capabilities, build us a data platform. And in the past, there's always been this idea, years ago, where you focus a ton on the stuff that we take for granted now. So how do you get elastic compute? How do you get unlimited storage? How do you enable data to come into the platform through ingestion capabilities and allow people to consume it? But from my experience years ago, the aspect of observability and metadata was kind of an afterthought. And so we wanted to really put a lot of attention on that up front. And so one of the things we're trying to avoid was making a very invested decision right away without allowing the platforms to evolve and learn from what's occurring during that time period. So we really didn't want to choose an approach that would lock us into that pathway. And so for us, this idea of OpenLineage making a standard that all different data producers could align to, and custom application code could align to, it was really exciting, appealing. And then that's really what kind of got us interested and wanted to learn more about it.
Yeah, this is interesting, right? This is exactly the same kind of train of thought that led to the creation of the Marcus project. So when I was at WeWork, right, we were like in this high growth period of the company, and having to build a data platform enabling streaming use case, batch use case, storing data, sharing data, all of those things, and building analytics for physical space. And one piece that was missing in the ecosystem, in my opinion, was this metadata management, right? Knowing about all the jobs, all the data set, how they depend on each other, and really building that map of all the dependency across a company. When you have many organizations, many teams producing and consuming data and depending on each other, but it's always very opaque and it's very painful to troubleshoot problem across all those dependencies. So that really led to the creation market. So it's interesting, like we really had this similar motivation at the beginning, which makes sense, right? Like when you think of it.
Yeah, and that's actually a great probably segue to why did we even choose Marquez from the get-go, is that I've been in companies before where we have had to try to build this out of necessity. And you're right. I mean, it's really difficult to try to target all these different sources of metadata, understand how is it stored in there? How do I get it out? You know, can I get it out? But then to try to make that usable within your own organization. And that's historically been a lot to do with, you know, like I said, like a custom build or like a very rigid solution from a vendor. And so, yeah, I think that for us, Marquez was, you know, was really promising because it was very much aligned to OpenLineage. So we were excited about all of that. I mean, this was, you know, like a year ago. And so it was really something that was easy for us to get stood up and to install and to be able to get immediate value from, rather than having to just think about, you know, what do we want to do? We could actually do something. And that was a huge win for us.
Yeah. And this is, this makes a lot of sense, you know, like, and thinking of, in my mind, this is the kind of thing that could only be solved through open source, like solved properly only through open source and collaboration in the community, and really like not just creating an open source project, but involving a lot of the people who need this feature from the beginning. Because you've seen, you know, there's either like lineage companies who try to solve this from the outside, like understanding the complexity of everything and building solution that depend on all the internals of all the project, and that becomes very brittle, very expensive to maintain, and as things, everything's evolving all the time, so you have to keep up to date. But when you solve that as a community, right, as an ecosystem, and like reaching out to all the people, either the Spark community or the Airflow community or DBT and all, and like the data quality project, there's really building this consensus and creating this open source API and common representation, and really starting to push that in every project. And that's where you get really the benefit of open source, right? Like instead of having to keep up to date with the complexity of all those projects, it's all those projects that start standardizing on a common representation of lineage. And that's really, as you know, a data community, I think, in my opinion, the only way we can solve it without making it like a constant pain of maintenance, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the earliest things I really noticed on the OpenLineage side was as the specification was evolving and people were kind of giving their input as to what this looks like. I remember our team had the use case that came up of, you know, what if your source data is a file? Like, what does that look like in this specification? And it was interesting just to see all the different perspectives of that and see the community kind of come to an agreement of like, this makes the most sense. This goes with the vision. And I just don't think that you could solve that inside of your own bubble at an organization.
Yeah, if you solve that from the outside, you have to deal with all the small differences, and that don't exist for a particular reason. It's just like different people did different things. But if you bring people together, right, you can get a lot of simplification, because I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's more of a human problem than a technical problem to create this kind of open source project. This is nice. And how did you drive your process of, did you have like to select across multiple projects? Were there certain things that make like a lot of sense right away in the way you picked Marquez to build on top of?
We did, yeah. So we really wanted to take, like I said, sort of that low investment, high impact approach. And so for us, Marquez was immediately appealing because our team is very skilled in Java and Kubernetes and just a lot of the technology stack lined up together. So we knew that it would be very simple for our developers to be able to get involved with that and understand it, but also just having the ability to align it into like our existing infrastructure through Kubernetes was a big win, and having the ability to to interact with a community that was receptive to feedback and to us changing certain things was a big deal for us as well. So for us, I mean, the functionality was all aligned with what we were looking for up front. So the big things that we really focused on were some of the minor details around some of the organizational security practices that we have and tuning and making things customizable to meet our needs. But it also happened to be something that, I think a lot of other people had the similar needs. And so it's a good example where, we can kind of come together, contribute that, and all sort of help each other out.
Yeah, I think that's one of the design goals of Marquez, which is the reference implementation of OpenLineage, to be really easy to deploy, right? Like it's a Docker image, and yeah, inside of it, it's a Java service with a REST API, and then the only dependency is a Postgres instance for the persistence layer. And that's pretty much it, right? Like it's on purpose, trying to be really easy to deploy. So you can put it in Kubernetes, you can put it in something else, and all you need is provide a Postgres database to get started.
Yeah, and that's a great point on the Postgres, is that, I mean, it's not forcing you into, on-prem versus like a single cloud provider. I mean, there's really a lot of options there, and that was really the thing that prevented any barriers for entry for us. I mean, we could still make all the same decisions we wanted to. We just got all this platform and this functionality for free, essentially.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing what I've seen people in the community use a lot, the Marquez as a UI, of course, that lets you explore the lineage and the metadata and how things depend on each other. But it also has a REST. It's all built on a REST API, and people actually like that and like integrating Marquez in their own stack, right? And build other tools on top of that. So everything you can do through the UI, you can use through the REST API.
Yeah, and that's been a big one for us, just trying to be able to build our own sort of platform vision around tooling, having those APIs, a ton of flexibility there too. And so one of the things that I'm curious from your perspective, Julien, is I obviously have seen, the needs of our organization and kind of like the things that really hit home to us. I'm curious, when it comes to the rest of the community, like what are some of the major features that have really appealed to people, or some of the big concerns that people have had to come in and solve with OpenLineage?
Yeah, one thing that's interesting, actually, depending who you talk to about lineage, they have very different perspective on what lineage is. So I think there's like, I was quickly categorizing. There's like data operation, there's compliance, there's governance, and those all depend on data lineage, but they use it in very different ways, or they have slightly different definitions of lineage. So one use case I've seen quite a bit is compliance with privacy regulation, like GDPR, CCPA. And so it boils down to knowing where my user private data is, where it flows, who's consuming it, where is their derived data that may contain user private information, and really making sure the user private data is only in the tables it's supposed to be, right? And like avoiding kind of using it for a purpose that the user didn't agree to, or something like that. Or being able to forget people, know where to delete their data, or being able to tell them all the data you know about them, right? These kind of use cases. So lineage is really important for that. So that's one use case. Obviously, another use case that is really important is operations. And so it's kind of like knowing that my data shows up, it shows up on time, and it's correct, right? It's kind of like this reliability of pipelines end to end. And that's something, for example, like Datakin, my company, we're building a lot of use case around, right? How do you understand dependencies end to end? And you can quickly troubleshoot if data is wrong or is not showing up or is late at some point. Understanding at the high granularity dependency, quickly troubleshoot the root cause and understanding what caused my data not showing up, or the data being wrong, or these kind of problems. So those are two. There's lots of governance as well, like in data discovery, more for analysts. We want to know what data exists and what are the relations. Lineage is really important to understand how core data sets are derived from the raw import data, or understanding those relations between layers. Usually you have kind of like raw imported data, and you have kind of more cleanup models, and then you build metrics out of it. And it's kind of understanding things, and understanding that a metric is actually derived from the proper information in other core tables is also really important. So those are some of the use cases that people use Lineage for.
Yeah, and some of those that have really been key for us. So, I mean, when you think of a data platform, a lot of the big things for us was, just getting usage and getting people in there to see what you have available for them. And so, when you have a company with so many different data sources, being able to build our own ingestion services that could utilize OpenLineage, so not having to wait for somebody to build an adapter for you, or waiting on these really hard dependencies, it was really useful because meeting those metadata events allowed us to track that full lineage like you're talking about, and allowed us to capture those tags for various privacy concerns. And yeah, that's been really huge for our build out.
Nice. I see an interesting question here on the Q&A from David Shu. Do you have any recommendation on how one should approach data quality monitoring and alerting while building data lineage process solution? So actually, this is an interesting one, and I click answer live. I think one thing that we've seen is we have an integration of Great Expectation, for example, to take one data quality library in particular that's very popular in the Python ecosystem. So people can define their Great Expectation evaluation asserts, and like defining what data quality is. And this will get connected to the lineage, right? So if you imagine, for example, you have an Airflow DAG and you have multiple transformations, or maybe you have a DBT jobs and you have multiple models deriving from each other. So you can run this every hour or every day. And at the end of it, you may apply a Great Expectation job that verifies certain attributes of the data: number of distinct values, min, max, number of rows, number of null per column, or things like that. And so the OpenLineage integration is going to keep track of the result of that. So first, what assert passed or not. So maybe everything's passing for a while. And also the metrics that are associated with that. So if you make an assertion about the number of distinct values, it's going to keep track of how many distinct values there were every run. Or if you are number of nulls, right? If you put a threshold on number of null, there should be, it's something is going to keep track of how many null there were for every run. So when the day arrives, when your assertions are failing, then you can connect it to the lineage at the run level. So you can compare between the two updates where my assert went from passing to failing. I can see upstream all the other changes in data quality metrics that may have happened correlated to that, right? So it's very interesting, right? Like the null count may have gone up, and then correlate that to the same update upstream of a null count going up. So it's kind of, OpenLineage lets you connect these data quality metrics to your very granular run level lineage and really understand from an operational level what change upstream broke your data, right? Or maybe it's a bad import from a third party. Maybe someone changed the logic of another job and there's a join that's not working anymore, like a various problem that can happen like this.
Yeah, that's really good detail, and something I want to add that I think will help answer a couple other questions in here. OpenLineage is the specification itself. So if you think of how tools can talk to each other, when it comes to a metadata event, OpenLineage has a bunch of concepts you can learn more about, where there's input data sets, there's a job that's ultimately processing that data, and then there's the output data sets that are produced by it. And so Julien mentioned as well the different runs of the job. So how do you get even more granular? But the thing that has really helped us with that setup is that OpenLineage also is building a nice library of integrations in the open source community. So you can go to the website and see, how can you configure an Airflow environment or a Spark environment to automatically detect these events and emit those OpenLineage messages. And then Marquez is the tool that will know how to process those OpenLineage event messages and make it so that data can be stored and discovered and used in a lot of these operational ways that Julien was just talking about. But yeah, I did want to kind of call that out, because in Marquez, our team's been using a lot of the API-based workflows that will let you access all the data you'll see in the Marquez UI. But one of the questions was, what tools do you use to view dependencies? And Marquez itself is a really good tool to be able to view an entire visual graph of where did the input data originate, what are all the jobs that it flowed through to create additional data sets, and it chains it all the way downstream and upstream. Gives you some abilities to search for various things you might be looking for. So I think it's a really nice tool to get some of that functionality. And yeah, Julien mentioned that Datakin is really taking that to the next step. But one of the questions I wanted to pass to Julien, which is kind of more of a fun question, but there's a question around Marquez and how do you spell that? So it's Marquez. And I was curious myself, why did you name it Marquez? And so after kind of going through some of the quick starts and the unit tests, I kind of found some clues that helped me figure that out. But I'd like to have you tell the story, Julien.
Actually, that's a great story. Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, I didn't name it that, so someone else did. So I can tell the story. When we started thinking about Marquez, and we called it like the metadata layer or something like that. We reached out. So one first thing we did is we knew we wanted this to be kind of an open source project as part of the community and not like an in-house proprietary thing. So we started with a design doc, and that we shared with other companies, like people at Slack, people at Stitch Fix, I forgot, like other companies, and gather feedback and make sure we were aligned. And like this made sense. And I think one of the core contributor at the beginning, we started this project collaborating with a team at Stitch Fix. And so at the time, Juliette Hoogland, she's a former Cloudera. She's a data science, data engineering person. We kind of really understand both sides. She came up with the name. So we kind of were collaborating at the beginning, and she suggested the name. And the story is, how Kafka is named after an author, right? And there's a couple of those Apache LinkedIn projects, like Camus and Kafka, and I forget some that were named after authors. And so Gabriel Garcia Marquez is the author of 100 Years of Solitude. And he won the Nobel Prize for this book, I think. This book is about the story of a family in South America over 100 years, right? So it starts with the founder of a village, and then his children, and then the grandchildren. And so it's a story that's very much about lineage. It talks about this lineage and the evolution of this family over years. And therefore, she thought that was a great name for the project. And, the team, we were working together when she told that story. We're like, of course, it makes perfect sense. Like, there's no discussions. This is the name it should be. And so that's where the Marquez name for the project came. It's named after Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the author of 100 Years of Solitude, which is very much about lineage.
Yeah, and I just absolutely love that there's little hints within the unit test, like variable names and stuff of like, oh, that's a character in the book. So that's kind of how we found out indirectly.
Yeah, that's a very fun name. And OpenLineage kind of came out of it. So, we built Marquez, and it's like it was the integration and the storage and the versioning of all the metadata and keeping track of the lineage graph. And then as we were building this and, talking to other open source projects, you have things like DataHub, Amundsen, or other system, it started becoming clear that the most widely applicable part of this is the lineage collection, right? It's how we collect lineage, standardize its representation. And that's how OpenLineage was born, right? Like, OpenLineage is the most widely applicable part of this Marquez foundational project. And so we spun it off, and it's all part of the LFAI and Data Foundation, which is, the sub-foundation of the Linux Foundation that focuses on data projects. So it's like a strong governance model, a bit like the Apache project. It's kind of very similar in having governance. It's kind of, the structure is a bit different from the foundations, but it provides the same governance control. And so being the most widely applicable, it creates a much wider ecosystem, because now it helps really, when we talk about all those use cases like governance, operation, compliance, data discovery, They kind of all require lineage, but they're kind of very different use cases. So it's useful to have a standardization of collecting lineage and then specific UIs that help with various systems. So, which is why you have things like DataHub or Amundsen or Marquez that are focusing on different use cases and have kind of different ways of showing lineage, because people have different perspective on it. And so an OpenLineage is kind of, it's less interesting. The name is less interesting, right? But I think part of the OpenLineage name was really to draw a parallel with OpenTelemetry. You know, you have this open tracing that became OpenTelemetry project, which is about collecting traces and metrics for services, right? And that's part of the CNCF Foundation, which is the other Linux foundation around services stuff in Kubernetes and all of these things. So, you know, you have open telemetry for services with dependencies between services and metrics and metadata in some way. And then you have an open lineage for data world in the LFAI and data foundation. And that kind of, that draws this parallel. And I think is really powerful because it's the same really basic foundational starting point for the project, right? We need a common representation of lineage. And I think it's been great because like a lot of people have started reaching out, right? Because OpenLineage creates a wider ecosystem that makes even Marquez even more relevant at the same time, right? Because Marquez is its reference implementation, but you may have multiple consumers of those lineage events, right? So for example, recently the Azure Purview team with the metadata system for the Azure, Microsoft Azure cloud offering, they're very interested in consuming OpenLineage events. And so it creates a wider ecosystem when we can all collaborate, right? The way you make those successful open source projects is by aligning incentive, like everybody who contributes to it or use it, they make it more valuable for everyone, right? The more people use it, the more we contribute, the more we all creating value for each other, which is a really good incentive for this open source project, right? We all win the more we use it. So I think this is great.
Yeah, and I see we're getting pretty low on time, but one thing I think we really need to mention as well. So a lot of questions that our team had initially was sort of, you know, what's different about this approach and trying to understand that. And one of the things I think we really should call out is that OpenLineage is designed and intended to be used in real times, like as a job is running, collecting that metadata and emitting it, rather than having more of a after the fact approach, like a lot of the crawlers out there do. And so what that allows is that a lot of the platforms like, you know, Marquez that can interpret those events and create a lot of these tooling around them, you can start to make decisions as a pipeline's running. So should I even kick off this later stage based on maybe, as Julien said, this data quality metric? So it's really powerful stuff. And that was one of the cool differences in the approaches that I found as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's really stress the point of the different perspective of lineage. I think the crawling aspect is very much based on the kind of data discovery type of lineage. That I look at the query logs, for example, and I understand table to table dependencies, and I list the lineage from table to table, but I have no idea how those queries come to be and are scheduled. Where OpenLineage is really taking the approach of instrumenting the scheduler. Every time, like for example, if you use Airflow, if you use dbt, if you use Spark, of different things, every time a job runs, it's going to send metadata about that particular run and know what the inputs and outputs were, and all the related metadata. And there's lots of metadata you have access to when you're at the runtime, and sending that metadata when it happens. So you don't only have the table-to-table dependency kind of lineage, but you have much more granular metadata about what was the version of the code, you know, where it's coming from in Git, or how long it took, what was the cost on the platform, what did it run on, and really have a more precise metadata around this. And from an operation point of view, this is extremely useful understanding what changes impact your data. Cool. So I think it's interesting. The last question is, this is a great session. Thanks for sharing. Like, you're welcome. We're having fun. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and thank you. And to that note as well, OpenLineage, we found OpenLineage and Marquez very, very welcoming communities. So please come join us if you have more questions, or if you want to try this out. Marquez has done a great job making the quick starts extremely lightweight to run on a local machine or to really dig into. So more people would love to see you.
Yeah. So openlineage.io. You can search our OpenLineage on GitHub, and Marquez project on GitHub if you want more information. And I'll answer the next question on the chat, I guess. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for joining our session. Do you think this will let us keep going?
I'm not sure.
Let's
Thank
try
you
that.
all, just in case you're still here. We're enough time.
Yeah. Do you want to try that question here, Julien?
I'll answer in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the broadcast then. Yeah.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.